Welcome back, Aspire Leaders. In this week's episode, I have the wonderful Kyle Morin with me as he's going to share his journey as a substitute teacher here in Colorado to becoming the principal of a charter school through the pandemic and now shaping education policy with a practitioner's lens. Kyle reflects on his teaching experience in Taiwan, how international education systems compare to the United States, and the leadership challenges he faced during one of the most disruptive periods in modern education. Before we get to that conversation today, I want to quickly thank a few folks, Charlie Peck and Michael Sipple Jr. and the Talent Magnet Institute team for the opportunity to join them in this truly impactful event in Northern Kentucky. Together, we shared valuable resources focused on addressing student behavior, cultivating healthy habits to reduce burnout, and highlighting both our services and the thriving educator premium community. If you're searching for real solutions and ongoing support, head to the show notes, click the link, and learn more about this incredible community of educators. Your role is vital, your impact is lasting, and your well-being matters greatly. So with that, I want to jump into today's conversation with someone in my backyard, Kyle Morin. Welcome back, everyone, to Aspire to Lead, where we will be discussing the visions, inspirations, and experiences from top educational leaders. My name is Joshua Stamper, and you can connect with me on Twitter or on Instagram at Joshua_Stamper. Welcome back, Aspire Leaders. I'm so excited for my guest as he is someone that's been in the profession for over 15 years. He's been a teacher, a leader. He's doing a whole bunch of different jobs here that we're going to dive into, but Kyle Morin is my guest this week, and I'm super excited to have him. Kyle, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we were connected a while ago, and so honored that you would be on the show today with us. And before we dive into a bunch of different topics, I'd love to learn a little bit more about yourself, your educational and leadership journey.
Yeah, of course. So I believe we are connected because we're both here in the beautiful city of Colorado Springs and former school administrators looking at the next stage of our life. I had the fortune of growing up in the Denver area, and I went to school up there at University of Colorado, Denver. And I was part of the honors program at the school. And at the time, I was like, I'm just going to be a high school teacher. That was my goal. It's like, I'm going to be a high school teacher and coach cross country and track. And then gone to the honors program, and the professor there was all like, what they do, they sell to college kids, try to convince them like, look, you could do so much more. And I feel like that really changed my trajectory, because I look back at it and I think of just like any college kid, I needed a dose of humility. Like, I'll be the first one to admit that. But I was like, oh, maybe I won't just be a teacher and things like that. So is when I graduated college, I had my first student teaching experience. And that's when I said the dose of humility, because of coming into it, teaching was one of the hardest jobs that anyone could ever have. For me, definitely hard, challenging experience. But it also led me on a journey that I never expected. Because of that, I ended up applying to go teach in Taiwan on a Fulbright Fellowship, and just absolutely fell in love with Taiwan, the culture there. Returned to Colorado after doing that experience and did my master's degree in education policy. And at the same time was teaching. And it was that experience teaching, probably after doing it a couple of years, when I felt like it clicked. Because I had the opportunity to work in Denver public schools under a kind of a fellowship program and intervention job. And that's when I feel like I fell in love with the profession that I had intended to study, 5 years earlier. That I ended up working in the inner city, working with some challenging kids, and I'll never forget it. I had one young man there that everyone's like, oh, are you going to be the person to deal with him? And, he's one that was on my group of students to work with, and just giving everyone a hard time. And it's the year that my poor Broncos got killed in the Super Bowl by the Seahawks. And I just remember looking at him, I was like, the way you treat me with Peyton Manning treat his teammates this way. Flip a switch. The kid was never the same afterwards. And every day would just write notes for him, be like, hey, be my quarterback, be my star. And it was really that experience that allowed me to fall in love with the teaching profession again. So I ended up going back to Taiwan, spent 3 more years there. And then after Taiwan, moved to Colorado Springs, where I became both a teacher and a principal of a charter school down here in Colorado Springs. And then I left that job and I transitioned to a residency in education policy.
All right, I want to go back to Taiwan for just a moment. And this is purely out of curiosity. I'm wondering how that experience was for you as far as the educational system and how it differed from the United States and what you were studying. And I know you went back from, Taiwan to the US, back to Taiwan. So was there any adjustments you had to make as an educator?
I think my adjustments more came my second time going back to
Okay.
Taiwan. The first time I was there with a Fulbright Fellowship, so you're there, the State Department, and they don't tell you when you do a Fulbright, but really when you do a Fulbright, they're trying to recruit you to join the U.S. Foreign Service.
Oh, okay.
Like that was the thing. So we would go out with the Foreign Service officers, we're more of a teacher's assistant, go to all the fancy banquets. When I came back to Taiwan the second time, because that was right after my experience teaching in the inner city, I had a huge adjustment to make because I was so like firm, very strong classroom management, like do it like this, do it like this, that the Taiwanese kids pushed back. And they kept telling me, you're teaching Taiwanese style. I'm like, what do you mean by that? Because, it's very direct instruction, very strong lectures. And finally, after a while, I realized that the school hired American teachers wanting us to do project-based instruction because to them that's what American style was, the project-based stuff. So once that was finally explained to me, it, flipped the switch and I was able to like, okay, I could do project-based instruction, and I had the opportunity to kind of oversee the English program there and would hire other teachers and we would create our own curriculum, because before that they gave us curriculum books, and I'll be honest, it was teaching English for kids in like East LA that were like Mexican American backgrounds. So it'd be like talking about eating tacos and things. I'm like, these kids don't have a clue. Like they couldn't relate to it. So when they finally were able to explain to me what they wanted out of the program and how they wanted it more like practical English, like teach the kids how to, go through immigration at an airport and teach them the vocabulary words for it. And they did a whole unit and presented a play as a class going through immigration in the airport. It clicked. But before then, it was just like, it was not working. It was not gelling.
It's amazing what clear communication can do for you, Kyle. It's probably
Yeah.
something you learned as a leader too. But I want to stay with the Taiwan experience or overseas, because I can imagine there was probably some key experiences there that shaped you, not only as an educator, but also as a leader. And I'm just curious what those were.
I think definitely as a leader, it taught, you kind of brought it up. It taught me the importance of communication, and it taught me the
Mm-hmm.
importance of humility,
Sure.
because as I'm a strong believer as a leader that you're there to serve others. So kind of coming into the Taiwan role, I knew that I was the Waigoren, as I said, I was the foreigner. So I had to turn around and find out their system, learn what they needed and adjusted for it. So when I became a leader of the school, because it was a smaller charter school, is the same kind of mindset of like, the people are here. I need to see what their needs are. I need to take care of the people in the school. I need to take care of the families that I serve. And I need to do what's best for the students, kind of really taking that servant leadership approach.
Yeah, well, you just discussed a little bit about what that role looked like. Obviously, you said it was a small charter school. Typically, my guests here are, in rural areas that may be small, or, these larger public entities. And so for yourself, I know you had to really work with multiple roles, multiple hats as that leader. And I was curious if you could just share a little bit about that experience.
So I was a principal of a charter school with about 100 students in it, give or take. And my trajectory to the principalship was probably very non-traditional. The staff knew that I was interested in being a principal, but I was kind of figuring it out because my master's degree is not in education, it's in public administration. So I was kind of like, oh, maybe one day I'll be a principal. And I was basically told that the principal before me was retiring and it's my job. And on top of that, that was May 2020. So we all know what happened May 2020. So I had to start my principal job in the middle of COVID. And I don't know how many days were spent just talking to other school leaders that I knew, communicating and figuring out how to just keep the school afloat. So I think that's why it kind of like led me to the job that I do now in policy, because of running a school with 100 students. If we lost a large number of those students, or even just a handful of those students, we would not receive the funding to keep that school going. So that very first year in the school was coming up with ways to make sure that the families felt safe to send their kids back to school. So there's a lot of like, we're doing temperature checks when we come in. And then half the families were like, we don't feel comfortable, versus the other half are like, please do in-person instruction. And where a regular traditional public school would have the option of like, hey, go to another school, we're still going to be able to keep our doors afloat. We didn't really have that option. So we had like kids zooming in watching the teacher teach, doing their instruction at home. And there's even days how you alluded to me wear multiple hats where it's like on Wednesday, we couldn't figure out who would teach the online kids. So I was in my office as a principal teaching the online class while the regular teachers were teaching so we could just keep that school going and do whatever we needed to make sure the families felt safe and felt like they were served and taken care of in the school.
You talked about being a new leader quickly and reaching out to other folks and trying to get some experience that way or some knowledge, some wisdom from folks. I'm curious, as a new leader and having to make that role switch quickly in a chaotic time with the pandemic, what were some things that you did to help yourself with that growth process in such a small, chaotic time?
There were two things. Number one is seek out mentorship. It's kind of came full circle. So I was doing an alternative licensure program, and the person who ended up being my mentor was my former high school teacher. He had, like, my mom, full confession, I grew up with a mom that worked in the public school system, was PTO president, all those things. So she had remained in touch with my former high school teacher because of they both worked in the school system together, and he ended up moving up to a principal role. And then by the time he was my mentor, he was principal and special assignment. So kind of like a district position, like an assistant superintendent role. So he ended up being my mentor for the program, and we would meet about once a month to just bounce ideas off of him. And then the second thing, I was in a cohort of people going through the alternative licensure program with me. And one thing that I felt blessed about is I had that opportunity in Taiwan to be in a leadership role in the school before. So it's interesting to see our journeys in there. There are some people who are like, I've led a charter school for years, but never became certified. Now I'm finally doing it. So they had a lot of wisdom. And then people who's like their first brand new administrative role. And I thought I was somewhere in the middle because I had led a program in Taiwan where I was kind of figuring out both skills. And I know I said two things to begin with, but there's a third one. Is my second year as principal, I was part of a Colorado Department of Education program where they assigned me to a mentor of an elementary school in North Colorado Springs. So I would also work with him, have, I think, bi-weekly coaching sessions with him, and he would teach me just basic organizational leadership skills to kind of delegate, because that first year I definitely took on way too much.
That's pretty typical, buddy. I did the same thing. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to give things up. And then
job.
Especially when you're new on a campus and not knowing the skills or the strengths of those around you, it's hard to just take things off your own plate and give it over to someone else, especially if it's important. So yeah, I would say that a lot of folks run into that. I want to touch on the policy making piece. You said you transitioned from that role over to policy, and I'm curious what that looked like for you.
I left my role as principal in the middle of the fourth year. It was not my goal and design to do that. Mm-hmm. I knew that I wanted to transition to education policy because that's what my master's was originally in. And then at the same time, I felt like all those challenges I was facing running a small school, if policy was crafted different and implemented differently, it would have made my life easier, because I have a big passion for school turnaround work. I know I've listened to one of your previous podcasts and you had like a turnaround principal on there. Like, I wanted to be that, and I knew I was not quite there yet. And I had to reflect on myself, and I was like, oh, a lot of the things that were hurdles in my way that I've done a lot implementing into school came down to policy setting. And the biggest example I could think of is I had an amazing fourth grade teacher, routinely had the best results in the district when it came to her test scores. Kids loved her. And when I took over the school, we did not have an English language learner teacher because we're a small school. Found out she was dual certified in English language learning. So she ended up having to take on two roles on top of being on the building leadership team. And after a couple of years, she's like, I'm burnt out. I can't continue it. And I just would sit there thinking, as a principal, I'm like, okay, I did what I did in that situation, but how can public policy be designed in a way where they actually consider the needs of the schools? Then I'm like, I believe in charter schools. I believe they have a place, but did anyone take into account how this can place an extra layer of complexity and makes it harder for the school to succeed? So I wanted to do an education policy residency where I could study policy and start to figure out solutions for those problems, and had a chance to work for Excel in Ed, and had been studying school choice policy, early childhood literacy policy, career and technical education policy, and then just overall teacher policy.
Okay, so in addition to all of the roles that you've had in education, you also accidentally created a small business. So will you talk about that process and how that came to be?
Yeah, so accidentally is a good word there. As we mentioned earlier, I taught in Taiwan.
Yeah.
My One of my intentions to go to Taiwan is I wanted to save for a down payment on a house. And when I returned to Colorado, I had a teaching job. So I wasn't exactly able to do that. So I started, like many teachers do, find my side hustle. And I was teaching English on different online platforms to kids in China. I had the skill set, knew the experience. And next thing I know, I had enough students off of those platforms individually that is like people from China hired their students and then took those students and gave them to me. So before I knew it, I had about, two clients that provided me like 10 solid students that I just switched it from being teaching on a platform, cut out the middleman and created my own business with it.
Can you speak to those who are potentially looking at other roles and maybe are fearful of taking that leap? Because you've had a lot of opportunity to look and reflect on yourself, the skills that you possess, and saying, yes, I can move into this other role. And I know some folks are like, you know what, I've been a teacher for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and they're wanting to potentially move up or into a different role. But then also there's that fear of what it might turn into or what that role might be, moving out of maybe their own campus or their own four walls, the place that they have control of. And I know for you, not only changing roles, but changing countries. So can you just speak on like what the mindset was for yourself and the transition, and for those who are potentially fearful of moving into a different role?
For me, I'm a big believer in personal growth. My mindset when I went to Taiwan the first time was, if I don't take this risk to push myself and grow, I'll never become the person I want to be. So I often think as educators, we sell ourselves short. I remember a conversation I had with the district technology officer, like one of my last years as principal. And very nice guy. Talked to him. He's like, how's it going? Because that's one thing I didn't mention when I was principal is I reached out to the district so much. They had authorized our charter. The previous principal just kind of cut off all ties with them. And I became their best friend. I showed up to all the principal meetings, even though I wasn't technically required to as a charter principal, but my mindset is I'm here to learn. You guys have been doing it longer than me, so I'm here to learn and grow from you. And I remember talking to him. He's like, how's it going? And his comment to me is like, you could work for a Fortune 500 after this experience. And while is polite conversation topic, but I think that's true that as educators, we sell ourselves short because we're constantly juggling so much. And that when you step out of the classroom or you step out of a principal role, like at least in my case at the think tank, is I get to focus on one thing at once. As a principal, I had to focus on discipline, school culture, observations for teachers. I was doing lunch duty. I was always being pulled in every direction. But you learn so much from that you're able to then take that skill set and go to a new role and be successful.
All right, Kyle, I want to talk about how you're supporting schools now, because I know obviously you're a busy guy, and I love what you're talking about as far as like the skills that you possess. And I know for you, you've already shown to the audience that you have a lot of skills in a lot of different areas. What is it that you're doing to support schools right now?
Yeah, so after being a principal myself, I've really developed a passion for wanting to coach and help other principals, kind of like how my mentor did for me, because
Yeah.
he had that opportunity to just help me think through systems. We so often have complex layers, and we just don't get the chance to actually sit down and have a thought partner, someone to help us figure out, like, hey, how do I implement this policy while making sure instruction's up to par? Like, how do I look through state standards? And I just want to be that person that, I'm available to help principals think that through and bring everything up to speed and get them where they want to be.
Perfect. We'll make sure that we have a link for folks to connect with you in the show notes. But I also wanted to give our audience an actual item. So obviously it's great that they're listening to all the wisdom that you've provided in this conversation, but it's even better if they go and take an actionable item to improve themselves. So if there's something they could do tomorrow or the next day to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
Well, I think I already mentioned it in the show, mentorship. You
Yeah.
have to be honest with who you are and find the people that are where you want to be 5 years from now, where you want to be 10 years from now, and reach out to them and seek them as a mentor. I would not have been the leader that I was in the school without that mentorship. I still feel like I'm growing. There's next layers to my journey that I'm still working on. Now that I'm doing a residency and know that I'll likely transition to a new role, I'm seeking out
Mhm.
mentors in that next step. Like, okay, how can I learn from these people to get to that next step of my journey?
For sure. And I want to go back to what you had talked about before. You had said mentorship, you talked about a community that you were in, and then also coaching. And so, what does that look like for those who are listening, and where you can tap into those different places? So, Kyle, do you have any suggestions for folks as far as trying to better themselves in one of those three ways?
Well, this is going to be the probably one of the craziest suggestions out there.
Love it.
Like,
Let's go.
people don't think of it. LinkedIn is such an amazing place. I mean, that's how we became connected. We were connected through a mutual contact that he's a former principal coaching people. And I kind of reached out to him, said, hey, I just left the principalship of a small school. I saw your LinkedIn. You just left your principalship of a small school. Walk me through what you're doing. Next thing you know, it leads to an organic conversation. And I'll help you with this. I help you with this. Also, take that time, look for programs. They exist. I had my partnership, my mentor at the school through the Colorado Department of Education. They had a program intentionally designed to help early on principals be paired with master principals to coach them and lead them through the process. And now, like I mentioned earlier, now I'm the one trying to start going, now that I have some experience, to be the one to start helping people in return.
Yeah, I love it. Kyle, you're like the third person I feel like in just a very short period of time that has talked about LinkedIn, but I haven't had anyone speak about like the benefits of being in that platform. I know that's something that's a main place or hub for you on social media. So why did you find that as like the place that you love the most?
I think because LinkedIn, it's guaranteed it's your professional contact, and
Yeah.
actually completely unrelated to education during the COVID time, because I became principal May 2020, March 2020, I was teaching from home and had extra time. I had a friend who's like, hey, start a financial advising business. Didn't take off, didn't go the way I wanted it to, but I learned from that business that you need to do 3 contacts per day to try to expand your business. And LinkedIn was the easiest way to do it because I just reach out to people, hey, I'm doing this. Are you interested? So then when I transitioned to trying to build myself as a leader more, like because the principalship took over, I was always busy. I started making an effort to just on LinkedIn make 1 or 2 contacts per day, because 1 or 2 contacts per day just multiplies over time. You build your network and you expand.
Yeah, I've seen a lot more educators kind of go into that direction with LinkedIn. So I know for myself, I'm finding every day more and more folks that are kind of transitioning into that space. And I do like how professional it is. And there's a lot of resources that LinkedIn has available to you with newsletters and other things too that folks are posting in there. So love it. Will you just share about where folks can connect with you on LinkedIn?
Yep. Obviously, LinkedIn's the easiest place to get a hold of me. Look for me. Kyle Morin's the name. I typically just Google myself if that helps. And I'll also share with Josh. If there's any way that I could help anyone in their leadership journey, just let me know and I'm here.
Yeah, and Kyle is so gracious with his time. I had a wonderful conversation, what was that, a year ago with you?
Correct.
And yeah, Kyle is so genuine and giving of his time, and that's a true statement. So I will make sure that the LinkedIn is linked into the show notes and on my website over at joshstamper.com, and we'll make sure that folks can get a hold of you in that space. If you're watching on YouTube, I appreciate it so much. Love for you to subscribe to the channel. Make sure you're hitting that like button. If you have any questions for Kyle, you can also throw that in the chat there or in the comment section, as we'd love to provide that to Kyle too. And man, you're just doing some wonderful things. I feel honored and privileged to be connecting with you for such a duration of time and call you my neighbor in Colorado Springs. It's awesome. So just love that you had the opportunity to be on the show and share out all this wonderful insight and wisdom. Just want to thank you for being on Aspire to Lead.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to listening to this podcast.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.